Okay, so I'm going to try to keep this brief, which I know is an entirely laughable thing to say because I, let's face it, never keep it brief, so here we go. So folks, basically we're going to discuss the books that I read in June? I don't know why I'm getting the months mixed up already, but that's just life. 9? Did I count that correctly? I believe 9 books is what I managed to read over the course of the month, which is, all things considered, not that bad. Okay, the first of the books that I read was Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. So this follows orphan Anne Shirley when she is adopted by the Cuthberts and starts a new life on beautiful Prince Edward Island in Canada. And life is full of scrapes, friends, trouble, and plenty of scope for the imagination. So this was actually a reread. I would say this is maybe the 4th or 5th time I've reread this book, maybe. I know I read it once or twice as a kid, once as a teenager, once like a year or two ago, and then this time. So yeah, it's been a few times. This reread brought me like a lot of joy. I honestly still kind of shake my head at some of the things that Anne says, mainly when she's being like very overly dramatic. There are a couple of scenes that I can think of where it's just like, oh, child. But there is still honestly something so incredibly endearing about her. Last time I read this, which was the first time since becoming an adult, something that really struck me about this book that I hadn't really considered or thought about in my previous reads of it was Marilla. I hadn't really spent that much time thinking about Marilla. Like Matthew is amazing and the best adopted dad ever, but I hadn't really spent too much time thinking about Marilla because she was a little bit grumpier, you know. But last time I read this, I was just really struck by her character growth overall. There were subtle things about her that I hadn't really picked up on, maybe because I was a kid and I was like more focused on Anne and her friends and stuff like that, but now as like an adult, I was looking more at the adults in her life and the people around her. So yeah, Marilla's character growth was just, I don't know, on this reread, it's definitely made Marilla one of my favorite characters now. Her softening demeanor and also her and Anne's relationship just made my heart really happy. I was kind of emotional while reading it this go around too, to be honest. I'm a big fan of found family in books as like one of my absolute favorite tropes, and Marilla and Matthew are definitely among like my top 10 favorite adopted parents ever. And of course, as always, the descriptions of like Prince Edward Island and Canada in general is like, and the nature and everything was just a delight. So yeah, I gave this reread 5 stars. The next book was also a reread, and that was My Secret War, the World War II Diary of Madeline Beck. This is part of the Dear America diary series, and this is by Mary Pope Osborne. Madeline Beck documents life in her diary when she and her mother end up relocating to a boarding house on Long Island in New York while her father is stationed somewhere in the Pacific. That's situation's like pretty usual for a Navy brat like her, but then everything ends up changing when Pearl Harbor is attacked, which plunges the US into World War II. So this book, I imagine a lot of children of the 90s were very into the Dear America like diary series, and this was my favorite out of the bunch because it was dealing with a time period and topic that I was very interested in at the time. I remember liking this honestly a whole lot more when I was younger. Maddie was well, I found her to be frankly annoying. I honestly had to like keep reminding myself that I too was a 13-year-old girl once and was probably also an annoying little shit. So yeah. she just overall doesn't do a lot of thinking about how her actions or words affect others. She does improve by like the end of the book, but I still found her to be mostly annoying for like, I'd say about maybe 85% of the book. I think my favorite part of it, this in general, was the other characters. I enjoyed getting a look at some of the other characters. Of course, though, because it's like her diary, you're not getting as much of a look as would be nice. But yeah, I also really enjoyed this one section at the back, at the end of the story, which is like historical information and tells you about what life was like in the U.S., especially for young people in the time period of 1941 and 1942. So like right before and during, when we first got into the war. There's a lot of like photos in here of different things and a lot of information about stuff. There's also a recipe in the back for a war cake, which, I mean, minus the chopped walnuts, because I find walnuts disgusting. The rest of it sounds pretty good. And yeah, it's just I really liked that section a lot, because that was definitely the stuff that I was really into. When I was a kid, I was like super into home front stories specifically. So like how people were dealing in the U.S. specifically during World War II, but I also really liked learning more about what was going on in Britain at the time. So that's kind of why I had this book at the time, because that's what I was into. And there's still like a part of me that finds that interesting. It honestly reminds me a lot of stories that my grandparents used to tell me because they were kids when World War II was happening. So this was 4 stars, mostly for nostalgia. And I did appreciate the research that obviously went into creating this book. But yeah. The next book that I read was The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, and this is by Mackenzie Lee. So this follows hopeless scoundrel Monty when he is off on his grand tour with his little sister. I've forgotten her name. I'm pretty sure it's Felicity, as well as his best friend Percy in tow. They are left to deal with a pretty short leash by their chaperone, but things steadily get more exciting for the crew once they are thrust into a dangerous situation. And Monty is also nursing a pretty heavy crush on Percy, which, this being in like the late 1700s, kind of complicates things. So this was actually a lot rougher of a read than I had anticipated. So a few years ago, when this book was like everywhere, like it seemed like everybody and their uncle was just screaming about this. And the two things that kept coming up about this book were, first of all, how funny this was, and secondly, how cute the friendship and relationship between Monty and Percy were. So while I knew this was obviously going to have like a complicated subplot, you know, i.e. Monty having a crush on Percy at a time when that was like illegal basically everywhere, like I knew that was gonna be a rough part of the read, dealing with like others in society and stuff. I honestly was not fully prepared for some of the contents of this book, or how more kind of more grim that sections of this book were than I had anticipated, just based on what everyone had been saying about it. So there's like physical violence at the hands of parents, there's slurs abound, like homophobic and racist, because Percy is half black, I believe, and there's also talks of suicide. So if like any of that is a trigger for you and you plan on picking up this book, just want to let you know, because I don't remember really hearing that talked about a lot of in like different things I'd heard about this. So if that's upsetting to you, just putting that out there so you know. I did find the crazy adventure through like parts of Europe to be fun, although they didn't really go through as much of Europe as it sounded like was going to happen. So that was slightly disappointing. There was one section involving like a boat that I would have liked a lot more of. And I would have honestly preferred less of hearing about how the three of them hadn't really washed or changed their clothes and so long that their jackets like stood up on their own. That honestly just might be a me thing. I found it kind of gross, and the amount of times that was brought up extremely repetitive. So honestly, this just might be a nitpicky, yucky thing that bothered me a lot and would not bother other people. So the other downside of this book, though, is that I really didn't like Monty. Like basically almost the entire time. At first, I found his commentary to be like really sarcastic and funny, and I thought he was, you know, kind of an interesting character. But after a while, he just ended up grating on me, namely because of his treatment of others, especially like his sister and his best friend. And he's just overall really selfish. So all of that kind of made me want to like shut the book because I didn't really like him, and he's like, of course, the narrator of this adventure. But I kept going because I liked both Percy and Felicity. So there was a little bit of growth in Monty, but frankly, I don't think it was enough growth. And I may or may not check out the other two books in the series. There's one that follows Felicity, which is book 2, but I do think it's gonna involve some like old-timey doctor stuff, and some of the details that were in here were really gross to me. I'm weird about like certain things. There's like certain levels of descriptive things that I can handle, and then there's a fine line that crosses into, well, that's gonna be my 3 a.m. thoughts. So this almost slipped into the, yeah, I'm gonna be thinking about that tonight, and I think that book 2 might have more of that potentially because it's following Felicity, but I don't know. And then there's also a book 3 that I might be interested in. I did end up giving this like 4 stars though, mainly for Percy and Felicity, and also the amount of research that clearly went into this. And honestly, I think maybe I'm just being a little bit too harsh on it because of how much I disliked Monty. So the next book that I read was Kiss of the Highlander by Karen Marie Moning. Alone in the world, Gwen Cassidy came to Scotland to maybe possibly find herself a man. When she decides to go hiking in the Highlands, luck is on her side when she falls into a cave and lands smack dab on a sleeping sexy Highland warrior. Drewston McKeltar was placed under a spell in the 1500s and woke up in the modern day to find a lass like right up in his face. There's some time traveling shenanigans and steamy scenes abound throughout this. Book was I think written in like, it's in the early 2000s. I think it was like in 2001. It definitely showed it with the references and a lot of the jokes that are in here, but I did find that kind of delightful. Definitely placed it at a moment in time. Honestly, I did go into this book with very low expectations. I saw that it took place in Scotland, it had time travel, and I thought, sweet, that's like 2 of my favorite things. But I still knew that sometimes like with romance novels like this, it will be a toss-up whether or not I will like it. So I did have fairly low expectations. Guys, I freaking loved this book. While admittedly I didn't really like Drewston that much, for at least a chunk of the book, and he's got a bit too much of that like super possessive, no real respect for personal boundaries thing going on that I know is a lot of people's cup of tea, but it's not really something that I'm a big fan of anymore. But I did come to like him by the end of the book, and I also enjoyed Gwen a lot. I thought she was a hoot. The descriptions of Scotland were very beautiful. The humor made me laugh like a ton, and there were a couple of details in here that actually made me yell like out loud because I was so just excited and jazzed about them. I won't spoil it, but yeah, these little, I don't know, it's just stuff that made me very happy. The steamy bits were overall pretty damn steamy, and I really liked the secondary characters that were in here a lot as well. I enjoyed all of them, or most of them. I'm hoping to track down the other books in the future. I know that there's at least one that's connected with the McKeltar family, but I think there's like a few others that are in like the same general like time period and like universe situation. So this was a definite 4-star read. So the next thing I read, I'll talk about, I guess, at the same time because they were books 2 and 3 in the Westmark trilogy, and that was The Kestrel and The Baker Queen, and these are by Lloyd Alexander. So these see the return of Theo, Mickle, Countless Bombas, and like all your faves as Westmark is plunged into war, and of course some of the aftermath of war. I don't really want to say too much about these books as they like are part of a trilogy, like book 2 and 3 in a trilogy, but I loved the writing. The character growth of Thea and Mickle were great. Seeing the shenanigans of certain characters again, it was just Countless Bombas is just ridiculous. And seeing what really happens to this crazy bunch when they get involved within the violence of war and the uncertainty and everything, like that was very interesting as well. I'm not usually much of like a reactionary reader, but I think I might have made my husband a little bit concerned when I was reading these because I kept like either laughing maniacally, setting the book down for a second and just being like, shh, it, or going, oh, no, 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 like a lot. So, I guess you could say I was really invested in the story. There are 2 downsides to these. One would be I would have honestly liked to have a little more of a couple of the supporting characters. I would have liked a little more of them in the story, just because I like them and I wanted more screen time with them, basically. And secondly, I felt like the ending of book 3, just it happened a little bit too quickly. It was a little bit rushed, but otherwise I really loved this series. I fully plan on reading like everything else that Lloyd Alexander has ever written, and this series, as well as a quote that's in like his bio in the back here, it's basically solidified for me that he's like one of my absolute all-time favorite authors. I'll read the quote because I really, really love it, and I think that it not only ties it to this series, but also the Chronicles of Bredane. So here's his quote. He says about the trilogy: "Books, not authors, decide when they want to be written. Vague shadows of Westmark and the volumes that followed have been in my head for half a dozen years before I was able even to put a word on a page. World War II was long over, and I had come home from Europe with my Parisian wife and daughter. I had been writing happily for a good while and had discovered that stories of fantasy worlds were, for me, the best way to express my attitudes and feelings about people, problems, and relationships in our real world. Still, questions stuck in my mind. The uses and abuses of power, not only the conflict between good and evil, but, far more difficult, the conflict between good and good, noble ideas broken by violence, even in a good cause, and in the midst of tragedies, events that were hysterically, incongruously funny. I have no idea why Westmark chose to be written precisely when it did. More surprisingly, I found myself dredging up distant memories of what I had seen and known myself in combat. I did not find answers to questions raised, and expect I never will, nor was it an attempt to exorcise my own demons. No, I keep and cherish those demons. I like to believe they're my conscience." So yeah, I love him. I gave both of these 5 stars. Next book that I read was Brevity and Echo, which is a short story anthology, and this is by a whole bunch of like writers. It looks like this is from workshops at Emerson College. So these people were like students are like taking part in workshops at Emerson College, and this is just an anthology of short stories, like very short stories in some cases. Every story has like the amount of words it is. Like here's one that's 124 words, 55 words, 831 words. So it's just like a bunch of however long they are, different lengths. Um, every tale, yeah, basically has how long it is, the title, and the author next to it. Overall, I really enjoyed this collection. There were a few that I liked more than others, and there were a couple that I read, and I had to put the book down and like ruminate it on a while because, damn. I like reading anthologies, but I'm honestly never really fully sure how to talk about them in review, especially when there's like so many stories in here, especially in here. So overall, I found them to be diverse, interesting, and well done. A couple were a bit upsetting, and a couple were very amusing. But overall, I think I'd give this like 4 stars because it's a very interesting experience, and yeah, I like short story anthologies. So. Due to my complete and utter lack of not being prepared for anything, um, my camera battery just died and I cannot find the other one. Like, I literally have no idea where it is because I thought maybe I left it on the bookshelf behind me. No, it's not there. It's also not in the charger where it's supposed to be. So, we are back to the webcam. It will be shaky. I apologize. Um, I don't think I'm gonna have time to film this weekend, and I need this video for next week. So, we're just doing this, and I promise to stop being a hot mess eventually. Okay, I only have like a couple more books to discuss anyway, so let's just go for it. The next book I read, was Tribute, and this is by Nora Roberts, and this follows former child star Cilla McGowan. She's come to the Shenandoah Valley to renovate her late grandmother's rundown farmhouse. Her grandmother was a big time movie star who died young, think like Marilyn Monroe-esque. She's not planning on having a relationship while she is there, but she does start up a flirty friendship with her quirky neighbor, the graphic novelist Ford Sawyer. When mysterious and scary threats start appearing at the farmhouse, Scylla and Ford have to get to the bottom of things before she faces a fate like that of her grandmother. So I absolutely loved this reread. This was the first Nora Roberts I'd ever read back in the day, and I honestly can say that I was a little bit nervous about coming back to it because what if I felt about it, a little bit differently? I didn't. Also, the handy thing was it had been long enough that I couldn't remember who the bad guy was. So that was also a bonus to this because I knew that there was a bad guy somewhere in here, but yeah, could not remember who. So it was like a nice little exciting thing again. Yeah, I love this. I I don't have much experience with renovation or doing anything, which is I mean, I know about mudding, spackling, sanding, painting. I know all of that stuff. I know a little bit about putting insulation in, because those are things that I have helped with previously. But that's about where my experience ends. Anything else I know is because I have watched like This Old House or all those like fix 'em up shows, and I do really enjoy that shit though, because I find the concept of flipping houses, like taking something so derelict that people have neglected and bringing it back to its former glory, just oh, that's amazing to me. I'm the type of person that oftentimes feels very bad for beautiful houses that are in disrepair. We actually have an old farmhouse that's right near us, and There was an old lady living there. I'm not sure if she lives there still. I have not seen her in like a year or so, but the place is roped off. It's dilapidated, and that you can see windows broken in it, and I always feel so bad for the place because it looked like it was so beautiful once. And if someone had the money and the time and care, they can maybe make it beautiful again. But I know at this point it's probably going to be condemned or something. And I find stuff like that really sad because I think that's missing a lot of like somebody loved it once. So I don't know, maybe that's why it makes me sad. I hate to see abandoned things. This is why I can't go into thrift stores because I hate seeing abandoned things. It's a problem. But uh yeah, so like, first and foremost, just the details of that, love it. Fascinating to me. Love hearing about the process. And that's something that I honestly really enjoy about Nora Roberts' books also, is that when she has characters that their careers are something or they're involved in a particular thing, it's like she knows that job. Like she's done the research, she's talked to the people, she's been getting all up in it, and it seems like it's just natural. Like every character is like natural. That's why I really the Bridal Quartet series where everybody like they're friends that have like uh wedding planning company. That's part of what fascinated me about that so much is because everything the details are gorgeous with each of their jobs and how the thing is run, and like all of that shit just really interests me a lot. So yeah, I can really appreciate how in it Nora Roberts is when she like writes um about a character's life and what they're up to, basically. I also really liked Scylla has like very detailed dreams about her late grandmother, and those were some of my favorite parts of the book. I found them really cool. I also and insightful too. I also really liked the relationship between Scylla and Ford. Um, I do have to say, having a friend named Ford made uh, a love interest in a book called Ford a little weird now. But I don't know. Yeah, the character was light. He's kind of quirky, he's funny. Um, Also, he's a graphic novelist, and that is something else that I find very interesting. So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was exciting. The mystery was very interesting. Yeah, I just overall had a really good time reading this. Um, I think maybe maybe the only downside is how pushy Ford could be with like Scylla sometimes, but at the same time, I think it was coming from like a good place, so I can't even really bitch about that. I just really enjoyed this reread, and yeah, I gave it 5 stars. The last thing that I read this month was actually a children's, and it was The Moon Lady, which is by Amy Tan and was illustrated by Gretchen Shields. And this takes place on a rainy afternoon where Ying Ying tells her rambunctious and very bored granddaughters a story from her childhood, which is a story of the time she met the Moon Lady, who is said to be able to grant you your deepest wishes. So, this is actually a storybook adaptation of one of the chapters from the Joy Luck Club. It's one of Ying Ying's chapters. The Joy Luck Club is about um, basically four Chinese American women in there. I think they're all ranging somewhere in like their 30s or 40s, maybe. And it's basically about them and their life experiences and their relationships, sometimes very complicated, with their immigrant mothers. Um, and also a little bit with their dads too, but mostly having to do with their relationships with their mothers, and also their mothers trying to relate back their experiences in life and what they would like to get across to their daughters. And all of that is kind of like all of that storytelling is basically coming after one of the women has lost her mother, who was part of the group. So, but yeah, so one of the chapters in there is from the point of view of Ying Ying, who is one of the older, um, the mothers basically in the group. And yeah, this is, like I said, the picture book adaptation of that story. I found the artwork to just be so detailed, so colorful and beautiful. Here, I can show you some of this. Let me see if you can see it very well. Just beautiful. Um, but yeah, oh, this one. This one's my favorite pictures. It's Ying Ying as a little girl in China. The dragonflies. It's a gorgeous book. Um, and it's short, sweet, to the point. I think that it was very cute, very beautifully done, and it has been a couple of years since I've done a reread of Joy Luck Club, but that's like one of my all-time favorite books. And I do remember that chapter because Ying Ying is one of my favorite characters from Joy Luck Club, so I did mostly remember the chapter, and I would say overall this is a very good adaptation of it. And I mean, Amy Pan obviously is involved in it anyway, but yeah, I think this is a very sweet book. And if you're like a fan of the Joy Luck Club, you'd probably enjoy this as like just an extra little thing. But I think it's also a nice story to tell, to read with little kids too as well. The last thing, oh, right, that was 5 stars as well. The last thing that I have to say is I DNF'd one book this month. It was an audiobook that I was listening to. And unfortunately, it was The Happy Prince and Other Tales by Oscar Wilde. Um, so it's possible that I should have read more about the collection before I just started listening to it. I hadn't really looked up any reviews or checked Goodreads or anything. I just saw that this was a classic that was available that I could listen to an audiobook of, and I was like, oh shit, it's Oscar Wilde. Love to. Um, I just kind of assumed due to how like silly and fun Wilde's play, like being Importance of Being Earnest is, I figured, oh, this is gonna be entertaining and great. It was gonna be a lot of fun. I made it 3 extremely depressing stories in and decided that this was not the book for me. I might come back to it someday. That is not today. Uh, these didn't read as like fun. I know there was like moral type things trying to be introduced there, but it was just extremely depressing and it actually reminded me a lot of like Hans Christian Andersen's tales and I have never liked those. Like I hated them as a kid. And I do not really like them as an adult when I revisited them a few years ago. So yeah, I like the Disney-fied versions of those tales. I actually prefer them to the originals because the originals are all just the saddest, most depressing endings you could think of. I don't know what was going on with Hans Christian Andersen in his life, but damn, dude, damn. So yeah, that long-winded explanation was basically saying that the 3 tales that I read in The Happy Prince, which included the story The Happy Prince, which spoiler alert, it's not happy. Um yeah, I just couldn't do it, you guys. Maybe that's like I don't know. Maybe that's just silly on me or whatever, but I don't know, man. The thing is that I don't mind fairy tales when like the bad guys come to a bad end because that's like all is right with the world. Um, but when bad things happen to good people, it just upsets me. And I I don't know. I don't know, guys. I guess maybe I wasn't in the right headspace possibly this past month to really read that. So, like I said, I may come back to it someday. when I am like more mentally prepared for reading depressing fairy tales, but that day is not current. So yeah. Anyway, that was everything that I read or did not quite finish this month. Um, it was, I think, overall a pretty decent reading month. Um, read a lot of good stuff. Um, had a lot of good fun mostly with everything that I read. And yeah, let me know if you guys have read any of these books. Um, if you're interested in any of these books, let me know that too. Or if you think you have any recommendations for me based on what I said about these, what I liked or whatever. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you for always watching. If you are new here, please consider subscribing. And I hope you guys are having a great weekend, wherever you're at. I will see you next time. Bye.